This video is about snags, the ecological forest towers. A snag is basically a tree that has died and remains upright. Snags make up roughly 20% of all the forest trees that are standing. Apart from snags, there are other examples of dead trees in a forest. These are usually trees that have fallen down completely, and they may have fallen down due to high winds, avalanches, landslides, fire, or some other kind of reason, for example, lightning. What is wind throw, blowdown, or blowdown? One of the things that causes trees to die is when they are blown down by high winds. These high winds might be caused by gales, hurricanes, or tornadoes, or even just simple thunderstorms. And they usually blow down completely, so the tree is completely uprooted. You can see in this case these trees have been uprooted, and oftentimes one tree will knock down another tree as it falls. And usually when there's a blowdown or wind throw, several trees will be blown over. Some trees might snap in half. Trees can die for a number of reasons. They might die from competition for resources with other trees. For example, you can see the two trees on the left are competing directly for light. They might be smothered or strangled by creepers. You can see the tree on the right is surrounded by a series of creepers, and there are also bamboo plants competing for. You can see another two examples here of trees competing with vines. The tree on the right is covered with ivy. Trees may also be damaged by animals such as porcupines and also beavers, which might chew at the base of the trees or completely chew the tree down in the case of beavers. Some more porcupine damage. You can see the bite marks at the base of that tree on the left. Fire might be another reason why trees can be damaged, especially if the fire is pretty intense and there's a high fuel load. The fire might spread into the crown of a tree and then threaten the life of a tree. Where fires occur, you might see several examples of damage from fires. On the left you have a burnt out snag. Generally speaking, if you see a stump like this that is burnt out, it usually was a tree that was dead already. So a standing dead tree, in other words a snag. On the right you see damage to the base of this pine tree by a fire. This is called basal fire damage, and this is a live specimen that's been damaged by a fairly intense fire. The bark of course has protected the tree against complete damage, so this tree will recover fine. Here's some more examples of basal damage in trees. So basically basal damage occurs when you have the bark burnt usually or damaged in some way by an animal, and it exposes the inner wood, which begins to rot away. You can see that very clearly in this example. Here's another example of basal damage, and another one, and yet another one. So what is the purpose of a snag? Snags are a vital element of the ecology of any forest ecosystem. They go through a number of stages in their lifespan, and during these stages animals will make use of them. Firstly, a snag begins by losing its small branches, after the tree has died of course. The bark then progressively peels off. Larger branches begin to break off. Topping off of the snag occurs, in other words the top of the snag breaks off, and then finally there's collapse and decay on the forest floor. So once again we can cover the steps in the process of the snag cycle. Small branches start to break off the snag. This is quite an interesting example of a little bit of competition between two trees, probably led to the death of the tree on the left, which is now a snag. Then the snag begins to shed its bark until it is eventually smooth. Finally, larger branches break off, and eventually the tree is topped. The snag is topped, in other words it breaks in half near the top. And then in the terminal phase of the snag cycle, the snag collapses and begins to decay on the forest floor. How to read the forest floor. Once a snag has fallen and it begins to decay on the forest floor, it will eventually leave these mounds of material, usually covered with moss, which are called pillows or mounds. At one end you'll have the pillow or mound where the tree trunk has fallen, and at the base you have the uprooted roots, which make a little hollow or opening called a cradle or hammock, where the roots were uprooted. And this can be very useful in finding direction in a forest, because it can give an indication of the wind throw direction, and from that one can determine the prevailing wind direction based on thunderstorms that typically occur in the area. For example, in North Carolina, in the Durham area, the typical primary winds come from west-southwest. So if the tree is blown down like this, you'll know that the wind has come from west-southwest. So the arrows there are showing the wind origin, in other words, the direction from which the wind is coming, and then the wind direction in which it is blowing. When a snag falls, it typically leaves woody material. This material is called coarse woody material, and it's basically any woody biomass that lies on the forest floor is called coarse woody material. Here you can see various stages of decay of coarse woody material, either as trunks that have fallen down or stumps where the trunks have broken off. So snags actually do form in rivers and streams. An example would be an aquatic tree such as a bald cypress or a swamp tupelo, which would remain standing once it dies. It's a typical example of a snag within water. But scientists also refer to a lot of trees that have fallen and are washed into rivers and lakes as snags. Here's an example of wood debris in a stream course. So snags can alter river courses and flow dynamics in a river. They can cause all kinds of eddies. They can provide shelter for a lot of organisms. They can block rivers and cause damming. In the case of animals, such as animal activities such as beavers, etc., that might cause blockages in rivers and also benefit from snags in rivers. So here you have a beaver on the top left. You have a nutria on the bottom left, a muskrat on the top right, and a bullhead catfish. These all derive benefits from snags, either by damming the river to provide the conditions they need to survive, but also as shelter and as protection and as habitat for the organisms that they feed on. Some animals might make use of snags for sunning areas, for example with the terrapins. Snags would also provide a surface area for a lot of aquatic plants to grow on and algae to form on. It also provides feeding areas for fish. Snags might also provide shelter for animals such as salamanders, including this mud puppy. So what kind of animals make use of snags? There are a number of animals that might make use of snags. The raccoon is one of the most obvious examples, but there are many birds, woodpeckers in particular, that would use snags for not only for feeding but also for nesting. There are a lot of nest hole breeders that use snags. You'll find a lot of squirrels, flying squirrels, and various organisms such as reptiles, including snakes and lizards, that might use a snag as a shelter. Various invertebrates such as scorpions, spiders, insects. How long do snags last in a forest? If it's a fairly soft wood, such as a birch or a poplar, typically a snag will last for less than 10 years in a forest. It's a harder wood and a particularly large tree. The tree may stand for more than 100 years. Typical example would be the giant sequoias or redwoods, and and something like a cedar. How does the wood of these snags decay? The wood typically decays because of an infection by various fungal species, and you can see there's a wide variety of fungal species that would attack a snag and start to break it down. Also, you would have termite activity, wood borer activity, which would contribute to its breakdown. And animals such as bears might also contribute to the process of decay or decomposition of tree trunks in snags and things by breaking open the tree stumps or snags so that they can get to the various insect larvae that they might want to feed on. Sapsuckers and pileated woodpeckers, as well as other woodpeckers, can cause a lot of damage to a snag or a tree, and either undermine a living tree or help break down a snag. So on the right hand side you can see damage from a pileated woodpecker, and on the left hand side a sapsucker has left several holes in this tree. Snags as ecological towers. Snags provide a lot of good habitat for animals. The open branches of a snag are ideal perches for a lot of animals, particularly birds of prey, where you might have hawks and eagles, etc., ospreys might use a snag to perch while they're sunning themselves or while they're searching for prey, and it also enables them to spread their wings without striking any branches or leaves. Owls also will use snags for perching while they're searching for prey, and they might even nest in snags. Here's an example of a lizard, a skink species, a striped skink that is living on a snag. Snags also attract predators. Because there are so many organisms living within snags, you'll typically get predators drawn to the snags to search for prey. Woodpeckers would be searching for grubs, so would bears. Something like a marten, this is a European marten, would come to a snag to search for smaller prey such as rodents, for example, or squirrels, or which are rodents of course, or anything else they might be able to feed on. Typically insectivorous animals feed at snags, and they therefore control insect numbers, particularly those found in snags. A lot of wood borers would take up in snags, so it would be a good place to draw such pest insects, but also then to have the animals feed on them. So the snags act as feeding stations in a sense, by attracting the various insects, and that of course would attract all the insectivorous species of animals that feed on them, and perhaps give a little bit of breather to the live trees that might be threatened by such insect invasions. So an example of an insect that might use a snag as an insect hotel would be a carpenter bee of the genus Xylocopus. Here you can see a picture of the chambers that a carpenter bee would form in order to raise its larvae. Some of the cavity nesters might include tree swallows, eastern bluebirds, common starlings, flying squirrels. There are any number of animals that are cavity nesters. In fact, woodpecker activity on snags provides accommodation for about 80 different species in North America. Decaying snags also provide nutrients for mosses and new vascular plant seedlings. So once the snag has begun to decay, it starts to provide a substrate with nutrients for first mosses to colonize, and then eventually various tree seedlings. Typically tree seedlings that like a lot of light and that are fast growing and relatively small seeds will take purchase on these decaying stumps, on the moss and decaying stumps, and so things like birches would, for example, grow on such a stump. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe.